You hear it before you see it, the way terror travels faster than sound. The wind carries the crackle of fire, the breathless screams, the sound of hooves pounding against wet soil. The night glows red as men with torches move like shadows through the fog, singing a song you don't recognize, one that sounds like mourning disguised as victory. Hey, before we descend into this forgotten night of history, where beauty and cruelty wore the same mask, take a moment to breathe. This community is now reaching millions of curious minds from every corner of the world. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Cairo, London, Karachi, or Sao Paulo. It's surreal how history connects us all. And if you want more stories that pull the curtain back on empires and their buried truths, subscribe and keep the lanterns burning. When the Ottoman soldiers came, they didn't come as an army. They came as collectors. Their orders weren't shouted but whispered, quick, efficient, methodical. From the mountain villages of Circassia, Georgia, and Bosnia, girls as young as 12 were gathered in silence, tied together with braided rope, their mothers' cries echoing behind them like broken prayers. To the empire, this wasn't slaughter. It was logistics. Behind every torchlight raid was an equation written in Istanbul. How many girls could be taken without destabilizing a region? How many could survive the march to the coast? How many would be worth training for the Sultan's harem? Ottoman captains kept ledgers the way merchants kept accounts. Human cargo valued in silver and promise. Witnesses described these nights as a kind of organized storm. The men moved with frightening rhythm, their scimitars glinting not from blood, but from the lanterns swinging at their belts. A soldier's voice might call out, "Bubiri Güzel, Yüzaltına değer." This one's beautiful, worth her weight in gold. The language of commerce replacing the language of humanity. By dawn, the village was quiet. Ash hung in the air, coating the earth in gray. Smoke curled from what used to be homes. Somewhere, a mother clutched her child's shawl, knowing she'd never see her again. The soldiers had already begun the long descent down the mountain trails, leading their chained captives toward the coast where the empire's hidden machinery awaited. At the slave markets of Constantinople, beauty had an economy. The traders were not monsters in the way legends describe. They were bureaucrats in turbans, their records neat and inked with precision. Buyers moved through narrow aisles of humanity, inspecting eyes, teeth, posture. Even silence was a commodity. A girl who wept too much was a liability. One who didn't cry at all, a potential favorite. The markets were not hidden in alleys but stood beside mosques and bathhouses, woven into the rhythm of daily life. The sounds of commerce blended with the call to prayer, as if holiness and horror shared the same air. A Christian girl from Georgia might fetch 1/500 silver pieces, more if she was light-skinned and unscarred. African women, brought from Sudan and Ethiopia, were sold under a separate price structure, reflecting the empire's quiet hierarchy of bodies. From there, a select few were chosen for the palace. They were not told where they were going, only that they were lucky. Transported under guard, they crossed the Bosphorus under dawn skies, the call of seagulls mingling with the slap of oars. Ahead rose the domes and spires of Topkapi Palace, glistening with the same light that had once burned their homes. The first stop was not luxury, but silence. In a marble courtyard, their heads were shaved, their names replaced with new ones: Aishi, Fatma, Layla, Turkish names chosen to erase the old tongue. Their Christian crosses were stripped away, replaced with amulets of the crescent moon. Conversion was not faith, it was policy. From that moment, they belonged to the Enderun, the imperial training system, an institution as precise as any military school. Older women, often slaves who had survived long enough to rise in rank, became their teachers. They taught the girls how to walk, how to bow, how to veil grief behind a smile. They learned Turkish, the art of poetry recitation, the way to pour coffee without a sound. But beneath every lesson was one unspoken rule: Never remember who you were. The empire's elite admired this refinement, unaware or unwilling to see that it was built on annihilation. To the Sultan's court, the women of the harem were living ornaments, proof of power and taste. The more diverse the beauty within those walls, the greater the empire's reach appeared. Every face was a map of conquest: the pale Georgian, the dark-skinned Abyssinian, the hazel-eyed Greek. Together, they formed a living mosaic of imperial dominance. And yet, inside the harem's walls, silence ruled. The sound of distant music, the whisper of silk, the scrape of slippers against marble floors, all choreographed to conceal the screams that once echoed in the mountains. The bureaucrats who managed this trade saw it as empire building, not cruelty. Records from the 16th century reveal columns of names replaced by codes: C17, G4, women reduced to letters and numbers. A Grand Vizier's signature marked approval like a merchant stamping grain inventory. What the empire called order, history would later call disappearance. By the time the lanterns burned out in the mountains, hundreds of girls had already vanished into the folds of the empire, their stories swallowed by marble walls and censored archives. And yet, beneath the grandeur of Topkapi, the stones still remember the footsteps of those who arrived in chains. The night they were taken, the night the lanterns went out, was only the beginning. At dawn, the palace exhales. The call to prayer drifts faintly from the city below, and inside Topkapi's walls, shadows bloom across tiles of Iznik blue. The corridors are awake before the sun. Servants glide like whispers. Eunuchs pad silently through archways, and behind latticed screens, 1,000 unseen eyes blink open. Here, silence isn't absence. It's order. The harem, the empire's most misunderstood world, begins its day not with song, but with discipline. Every movement, every breath, every turn of the head is part of a choreography that no one dares forget. The young girls, once captives from the Black Sea, now move in slow synchrony as if the palace itself conducts them. They bow to tutors, recite their prayers, and practice the subtle art of invisibility. "Do not look unless you are looked at," an older concubine murmurs, her voice barely louder than the rustle of silk. She has been here long enough to understand that attention is both weapon and wound. The new ones, trembling, their Circassian hair still uncut, learn quickly. Those who forget the rule vanish behind closed doors for correction. Each day unfolds like a ritualized performance. The women are measured, weighed, and catalogued in ledgers bound with gold leaf, documents so detailed they read like scripture. Their origins, languages, beauty, obedience, all translated into numbers and notes. It's a system of devotion and domination disguised as refinement. The harem's order is not random. At its peak, over 400 women lived within these marble chambers. The hierarchy was ironclad: odalisks at the base, concubines above, favorites beyond them, and finally the Haseki Sultan, the chosen consort. Power here was earned not by love, but by strategy. The Sultan's glance could lift a girl from nothing to nobility, but his silence, that could erase her. Inside the privy chamber, the women rehearse posture, voice, and poetry under the watchful gaze of the Khalfa, the overseer of manners. One girl falters while reciting a verse from Hafiz. The Khalfa's fan snaps shut. "Again," she commands. Her tone is sweet, but her eyes are merciless. Behind her, a eunuch stands with hands clasped, impassive as a statue. Through corridors scented with rosewater, the music of practice mingles with the metallic echo of locks turning. The harem isn't a prison of stone, it's a prison of routine. The women bathe in marble rooms where steam curls like incense around their faces. They are adorned with pearls that once belonged to others, reminders that beauty here is borrowed, not owned. At night, the palace glows like a lantern in a sea of darkness. Somewhere beyond the gardens, the city sleeps. Inside, the women sing in low voices, songs from their lost homes, songs that the empire pretends not to hear. In those stolen moments, their humanity hums quietly beneath the machinery of control. One evening, the chief black eunuch, the Kuzlar Aga, walks the length of the gallery. His robes sweep the mosaic floor as he inspects the quarters. The women lower their heads. "His Majesty desires peace in his household," he announces. No jealousy, no whispers. His voice is calm, but beneath it lies the threat of exile, to the old palace where forgotten women wait to die in silence. There are stories whispered through the latticework, of favorites who poisoned rivals, of secret letters smuggled through the laundry, of a concubine who once tried to leap from the tower to freedom. Her name was erased from the records, but her ghost lingers in the cold air that sweeps through the courtyards at dawn. Beyond its sensual myths, the harem was a mirror of empire itself, disciplined, bureaucratic, and absolute. The same pen that signed treaties also signed women into bondage. Eunuchs carried messages that could make or unmake lives. The Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, ruled from behind curtains, her hand unseen but omnipotent. Through her, a web of influence stretched from the gilded chambers of Istanbul to the far corners of Anatolia. Even foreign ambassadors wrote in awe and fear of this invisible world. One Venetian reported, "No kingdom in Christendom is ruled with such secrecy as the Sultan's household. Here, women are the empire, though none may speak it." Still, beneath the embroidery and incense, the air tasted of longing. A Georgian concubine once whispered to a servant, "They say we are queens, but queens of what? If our crowns are made of silence?" The servant didn't answer. Silence was safer. Every courtyard of Topkapi holds echoes of that muted empire. Laughter smothered before it reached the walls, tears swallowed in the name of decorum. The harem's splendor was a veil stretched over the pulse of captivity, and, like all veils, it was meant to both reveal and conceal. Beauty on the surface, sorrow beneath. As the muezzin calls the final prayer of the night, the palace once again grows still. The lanterns flicker, shadows ripple across painted domes, and somewhere a door closes with the quiet finality of a tomb. Tomorrow, the same rituals will repeat. The same songs, the same smiles, the same silence. But history, like a patient thief, waits in the corridors. One day, the empire of silent women will speak, not through their lips, but through the traces they left behind. The ledgers, the letters, the faint scent of rosewater lingering centuries later in the dust of Topkapi. And when that silence finally breaks, the world will hear not just their stories, but the sound of the empire remembering its own lies. The sea doesn't forget. Beneath Istanbul's glittering skyline, where ferries glide and lovers lean against the railings of Galata Bridge, the Bosphorus holds what history refused to keep. It is quiet down there, colder than memory, and darker than ink. Divers say they sometimes hear echoes, faint as whispers, the creak of chains, the sigh of fabric, the sudden snap of bone. It begins with a discovery. Near the mouth of the Golden Horn, a team of underwater archaeologists maps a sunken jetty once used by Ottoman ships. Among the broken amphorae and rusted anchors, they find human remains. Wrists bound with iron wire, skulls fractured clean through. The bones are small, female, young. At first, the team suspects execution victims from an uprising, but the carbon dating doesn't match. These bodies were not rebels. They were secrets. One diver surfaces, trembling. "They weren't meant to be found," he mutters as if afraid the water might be listening. Historians had long whispered about the missing women, concubines who vanished from the palace records, their names crossed out with a single brushstroke. The official explanation was always the same: transfer, illness, reassignment. But the ledgers of Topkapi lie. The empire perfected the art of erasure, turning flesh into silence and silence into myth. The harem's punishments were never written down, only remembered. A favorite who defied the sultan, a concubine accused of witchcraft, a servant who carried forbidden love letters. Their ends were quiet, deliberate. They were taken by night, wrapped in velvet, weighted with stones, and slipped into the Bosphorus before dawn. The current would carry them toward the Black Sea, dissolving both evidence and shame. For centuries, the water kept their names, and now it gives them back. As news of the discovery spreads, journalists gather along the shore. The headlines speak of mystery skeletons and possible royal remains. But beneath the spectacle lies something deeper, a reckoning. For every empire that builds its beauty on suffering must one day face the bones beneath its gold. In the dim light of an archive room, a historian named Layla turns the brittle pages of a 17th-century ledger. The ink has faded, but the pattern is unmistakable, the sudden disappearance of names that once filled the harem lists. 57 missing in a single year, she whispers, and not a single burial recorded. She runs her fingers across the margins where palace scribes had brushed over names with fresh ink, as if rewriting the past could make it cleaner. But paper remembers what it was told to forget. Under infrared light, ghost letters bloom again, pale and trembling. Zara, 15, Circassian, removed to the waters. Outside, Istanbul's skyline gleams, mosques crowned with domes, glass towers reflecting the Bosphorus below. The old city and the new exist side by side, one built upon the other. But beneath both lies a graveyard without markers. Scientists analyzing the remains find something remarkable: genetic traces linking the bones to modern families across Turkey, the Balkans, and even North Africa. Centuries of silence had not erased their bloodline. It had multiplied it. The empire's unspoken legacy flows in the veins of millions who do not know they carry the ghosts of the harem within them. One researcher, his voice thick with awe, says, "The empire hid them, but their DNA refused to stay quiet." Still, not everyone welcomes the truth. Official channels call for restraint, citing respect for cultural heritage. Museums hesitate to display the findings. Some say the story disturbs national pride. Others argue it dishonors history's grandeur. But beneath every argument hums the same fear, that the past might finally start speaking in a language the present can no longer silence. Art begins to answer where the state refuses. Painters, poets, and filmmakers reimagine the women once lost beneath the waves. In a gallery overlooking the Bosphorus, a sculpture rises. Hundreds of glass figures suspended mid-motion, bound at the wrists, their faces dissolving into light. When the sun sets, their shadows ripple across the floor like water. Visitors stand in silence, and for a moment it feels as if the sea itself is breathing. Layla returns to the shore where the divers first surfaced. The city behind her hums with life. Ferries honking, vendors shouting, the scent of roasted chestnuts thick in the air. She kneels and touches the water. "They were here," she says softly. The current curls around her fingers, cool and indifferent. The Bosphorus, once a symbol of empire and trade, has become a mirror. Beneath its glitter lies everything Istanbul has tried to bury. The empire's women, its crimes, its silence. The waves lap gently as if guarding their secret, and yet, even now, the truth keeps surfacing. In DNA, in dreams, in the restless pull of the tide. As night falls, the lights of the city shimmer across the water like 1,000 small confessions. The ferries continue to cross from Europe to Asia, carrying commuters who do not know they drift above the unmarked graves of empire. Down below, the currents weave through bones and bracelets, through fragments of embroidered silk, through silence turned to sediment. The sea keeps its counsel, but every whisper of its tide feels like a question. How long can a civilization stay afloat when its foundation is built on the drowned? The camera lingers on the Bosphorus, vast, glimmering, eternal. Then, for a breathless second, the surface ripples. A faint handprint appears in the reflection of the moon and disappears again. The empire sleeps, but its ghosts are awake.